not 5 days. And thankfully, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle finally agreed with that and dropped their proposal. So for what it's worth, that's my sense of it. I thank you again for your willingness to attend the committee, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from North Carolina, Mrs. Fox, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing. All of us are affected by the post office. All of us use the post office. All of us want the post office to be efficient. I want the post office to be self-funded, as it was planned to be many, many years ago. I use the post office a lot. The local folks in my area are great, and I enjoy talking with them. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Diamondstein, I have a question of you. My understanding is you represent 200,000 of the 600,000 postal union workers. I want to ask you how your union and the others are going to help assure the success of the Postal Service operational reform efforts that the Board of Governors and the Postmaster General have jointly designed. And I don't want you to mention more money. What are you all going to do better than you have done before, because you have a real self-interest in this issue?
Well, better than we've done before. I think the postal workers do a great job. And I think the postal workers, and we've seen that in the pandemic, underscored in these stressful and dangerous times. The postal workers themselves and the unions that represent them actually have done a lot to try to deal with the staffing issues, to try to deal with the overtime issues, and in fact have addressed questions of pay rates and benefits in a way before my time, I should say.
But my understanding is that benefits are climbing as mail volume is decreasing.
Well,
even though there may be a very slight decline in employees. So the number of employees is not going down commensurate with the mail volume going down, but your benefits are going up.
Our benefits, look, obviously the union believes that all workers should have decent living wages and good benefits. The unions have given up a lot of wages, and including some of our benefit structure over time.
Name an example, one specific example.
Okay. In 2011, the Postal Board of Governors chair testified before Congress that the American Postal Workers Union gave up $4 billion of wages and benefits in that one contract for the life of the contract, and that keeps giving going forward. We have increased the contribution, unfortunately, from our point of view, but the contribution that workers pay for their health care premiums have tremendously increased to the detriment of the worker.
But Mr. Diamondstein,
so that's an example.
Don't most people in the private sector pay some on their health care benefits? I think most people in the private sector do pay for their health care benefits.
But again, I don't want to argue. I'm sure you're aware that postal workers pay 28% of the premiums for a family health plan. That's over $6,000 a year that the postal worker pays out of their pocket. It's over.
Okay.
Right?
What do you want the post office to be self-funded? Do you want to be self-funded, self-sufficient, and not have to keep coming back to Congress to ask for money?
I don't know any time outside of the COVID in my history as the president and a union activist before that. I know of no time outside of the COVID emergency relief that taxpayer dollars, since it changed under the law in 1970, that taxpayer dollars have been used to go into the Postal Service, and nor has the Post Office, as far as I know, come before this body seeking money. I'm not sure where all this bailout idea comes from when it's just the opposite.
Should the Postal Service give incentives for the retirement of older employees and hire new employees?
That's a decision that management makes there. If you're asking about early outs, Congresswoman, is that? Well, there's been at times.
Just yes or no. Just yes or no.
The question is, that's a Postal Service decision.
Okay,
yeah?
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, IG Whitcomb, I have a question. According to CBO, the Medicare Trust Fund will run out of money as early as 2023. Integrating postal retirees will expedite the collapse of the Medicare program. What happens to postal retirees then?
That's, if the Medicare Trust Fund runs out of money, is that what you're asking?
Yes, and the employees are put into Medicare as opposed to their own health care fund.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a bigger challenge than the postal employees, but it's not work that we've done at this point.
But that's the admin, they want to get into the Medicare plan knowing that it's going to run into trouble before your own medical plan is going to run into trouble. So what does that say about the approach to this?
Again, that's something that is a bigger challenge than the Postal Service and not one that our work addresses or that I'm prepared to address. But we can get back to you if you're interested in us doing some work in that area.
The gentlewoman's
Thank
time
you.
is expired.
Madam Chair, one more quick question. Not a question. I have some material I'd like to enter into the record with
Without
unanimous
objection.
consent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cooper, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Many of our colleagues have mentioned the goal of self-funding for the post office, and it's a worthy goal. But, Mr. DeJoy, it's not a goal that you pursued in your private sector companies, right? Self-funding of health benefits over 75 years, that would have been disastrous for your company, right?
Well, we had self-funding plans, but they were not advanced the way, actuarially for the rest of everybody's life. So no, we would not have had that.
And no other federal agency has this requirement.
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
So here we're putting a burden on the post office that is extraordinary and perhaps fatal, and this Congress is hopefully going to lighten that burden. But this self-funding requirement, I think, has more implications. I think it would be better if we all agreed that we need to minimize the subsidies, because the cost of delivering mail in Alaska is clearly higher than in a more urbanized state, right?
It costs more to get to Alaska, and that's a different question than.
Yeah, but Alaska is part of the United States, just as rural citizens are part of the United States, and it costs more to deliver the mail the last mile to those people.
It does, but there's a process.
It's a largely unacknowledged cost because the price of the stamp is the same everywhere.
But that's the intent of universal service, sir.
But that implies a hidden subsidy and a hidden tax within each stamp, because some people pay more, some people pay, everybody pays the same.
It implies a cost for the service as designed by the Congress. It's a service. It's not a tax. You have a choice not to mail something.
Well, most people rely on communication, and the private competition that you face is much more flexible at varying their rates. The post office has a flat fee pretty much for everybody, even though the costs vary widely.
Well, that is, again, the design of the system. I think more appropriate is we have not been able to address that pricing for 14 years until just recently. That's been most of the damage that's been done to the organization.
But it puts the post office at a systematic disadvantage, right? Because of the design of the program. It's flat rate postage, and it goes anywhere, Alaska, Hawaii, the territories, same price.
Well, we talk about market-dominant mail products, that's what you're speaking about now, which we really don't have other, competition in that area other than digital communications and our failure to evolve over the last 10 years. So I really don't understand what you're getting at.
Would FedEx, Amazon, UPS be doing as well if they didn't rely on the post office so heavily for last mile coverage?
FedEx, it's a competitive product which we need to get better at doing. We have not evolved.
But they rely heavily on our last mile coverage because we're the only people who provide that.
That is not really true. right? FedEx actually doesn't do, their last mile delivery with us has been significantly reduced over the last year.
But they still rely on the post office to deliver, and you've actually been making money on the increase in package deliveries that have been sent the post office direction, right?
Package volume has been up significantly.
And that's been a
Well,
silver lining in the cloud.
Well, the cost coverage on competitive package volume is different than the cost coverage on mail as the pricing is designed. And sir, it's important that we recognize the difference in what it is you're identifying here, package delivery versus mail delivery, going to every address versus going to where we can price competitively, because that is a big part of the problem that we're attempting to solve with our new plan.
I think Mr. Diamonstein mentioned that the $45 billion that's been saved up for health benefits for employees, now it's only invested in low-yield Treasury bonds. It would be interesting if that money had been invested in the stock of Amazon, FedEx, and UPS. Would the employees be doing a whole lot better today than they are now with the low-yield Treasury bonds?
Yes, sir.
How much better?
Bazillions of dollars.
Bazillions of dollars. So
Well,
again,
we're all familiar with the investment strategy of federal government's and Social Security investment strategy, as that's been long debated, is you give up risk, for a price. I mean, that's a whole other discussion that you all have had for years.
finally, Mr. DeJoy, you're a political appointee, a holdover. No one knows how much longer your board.
That's incorrect. I'm not a political appointee. I was selected by a bipartisan board of governors, and I would really appreciate if you would get that straight.
Well, how much longer are you planning to stay?
A long time. Get used to me.
As long as the board approves your staying?
That's as far as my commitment to see our plan through, I'm here until I can see it tangibly produce the results we intended to. I believe the board is committed to that also.
But that's not determined by you, it's determined by the board.
Well, it could be determined by me.
Time
I
has
could
expired.
resign, right?
Gentleman's
I
time
could
is
get tired of it. I have other things I can do.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. Jordan from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. DeJoy, did you have any protesters at your house last night?
Not last night.
President Biden called for you to resign, Mr. DeJoy?
No, the president has not called for me to resign.
Any member of your board called for you to resign?
No, sir.
None of the Republicans on the board haven't called, any of the Democrats called for it?
We have, it's hard to tell in our board meetings because we all very much act in a bipartisan manner focused on postal issues. But there are two gentlemen that, the chair identified that he's a registered Democrat, and I think there's another gentleman on the board.
Mr. Bloom's a Democrat, right? He
Yeah,
supports
he's a
you.
Democrat. Yep.
As the chair of this committee, has she called for you to resign this Congress?
She has not.
She called for you to be suspended last Congress, but I don't think she's called for you to resign this Congress, has she?
We've had good conversations on a variety
Now, I
of
know where Mr. Conley's at and some of the Democrats, but I mean, last time you were here, you had protesters banging on pots and pans outside your house. You had 90-some people calling for you to resign. You were the worst guy on the planet last time you were here. I just want to know what's changed.
maybe, that's not for me to answer.
I mean, they were so ticked last time, Mr. DeJoy. They passed a bill. They called us in on a Saturday in August to pass a bill, and then they had a hearing on the bill they passed 2 days later. You remember that?
Sir, it was an unfortunate set of circumstances for me, for my family, for the postal employees, for the postal board. None of it was based in any type of fact. It was sensationalization. But we're through. I'm through that. The board's through that. We're just trying to get our plan, get this legislation passed, and get on with the improvements we need to
They passed
make.
a bill on Saturday, August 22nd, a bill they know had no chance of becoming law, a bill that was not even taken up in the Senate. Then they had a hearing on the bill they already passed 2 days later. Normally you do it the other way around. Normally you actually have a committee get together, look at the legislation, debate it, discuss it, have witnesses, get expert testimony, all that stuff, and then you maybe pass it out of committee and go to the floor and do it. They called us in special to pass a bill on a Saturday and then had a hearing on Monday, and all that weekend they had protesters at your house disrupting your family and, frankly, your neighbors as well. And now you're telling me you got no one on the Board of Governors asking you to resign, no protesters at your house, the president hasn't asked you to resign, the chairwoman hasn't asked you to resign, and I want to know what's happened. What's different between February 24th, 2021 and August 24th, 2020? What happened in those 6 months? What could explain the Democrats' difference in attitude?
Mr. George, Congressman, I don't want to participate in.
What do you mean you don't want to participate? I'm asking you a question, a simple question.
I believe
Can you
everybody.
hazard a guess as what might have happened between August 24th, 2020,
I am
when they
hoping.
passed a bill and then had a hearing on it? What may have happened between August 24th, 2020 and February 24th, 2021? What could have happened in the interim there that would change the attitude of Democrats?
One of two things. Either everyone's anxious to hear our new strategic plan, or we had an election.
I'm sure that's it. I'm sure that's it. Still waiting for an answer. I did this to you when you were here last time, Mr. DeJoy. I asked you, to comment on something. You wouldn't do it then either. What happened between August and February? What important event happened?
We had an election.
We had an election. It was all a charade. You not take my word for it. The Wall Street Journal called it a giant conspiracy theory. Called us back in. It was all part of the predicate for laying the groundwork for the mail-in balloting and all the chaos and confusion the Democrats wanted, and the laws that I think they passed in so many states, frankly, in an unconstitutional fashion. It was all about politics. It was all about the election. Agree with that, Mr. DeJoy?
It was a very sensitive time for the nation, and there was a lot of activity.
They accused you of things that they said you were restricting overtime. False. They told you, you were taking the collection boxes, doing something that had never been done before, even though it had been done by every previous Postmaster General. 12,000 of them had been moved by the Obama administration Postmaster General, but somehow you were the worst. Again, all under the guise of creating this crazy chaos that they wanted around the election relative to mail-in balloting, and you were the guy they used to launch it all, to start it all in the summer, when everyone was calling, saying all kinds of, like I said, they had you as the worst guy on the planet back then, and now everything, it seems to be so much better now.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And all the gaslighting that we just heard does not change facts. Mr. Diamondstein, please move the mic close to your mouth. Thank you. Am I making this up, as Mr. Jordan apparently would have you believe, that the President of the United States last summer, Donald J. Trump, publicly said voting by mail would lead to massive fraud? Did he say that, or am I imagining that, Mr. Diamondstein?
I don't think you're imagining it. What I recall him saying at one point is he was going to make sure that the Postal Service got no financial COVID emergency relief, because then they would be able to more effectively deliver ballots.
Thank you. But the point is, it was Donald Trump, the Republican nominee, who was planting the idea, aided and abetted by disruptive changes proposed by a new Postmaster General and a compliant Board of Governors, that actually eroded public confidence in the ability to vote by mail. That wasn't a Democratic narrative. That was a Republican narrative by the President of the United States and his enablers. And by the way, inconvenient fact, Mr. Heiss would have you believe that it was partisans on this committee, and he quoted a number of Democrats, by the way, admitted Democrats. For the record, I'm an admitted Democrat and damn proud of it. I didn't vote to overturn an election, and I will not be lectured by people who did about partisanship. But facts are stubborn things. It wasn't the idea that it was complete fiction, that the changes proposed by in fact, implemented by Mr. DeJoy with a compliant board, led by now Chairman Mr. Bloom, who's admitted he went along with them, It was a federal judge who found it politically motivated, not a Democratic critic. I refer you to a Reuters story last September. U.S. District Judge Stanley Bastian in Yakima, Washington, upheld a challenge by 14 states and enjoined the Postmaster General to stop what he was doing and said, the states have demonstrated that the defendants are involved, the defendants being Mr. DeJoy and company, they are involved in a politically motivated attack on the efficiency of the Postal Service. That's not some partisan Democrat. That's a federal judge. And that wasn't the only ruling that provided an injunction to stop the deliberate disruption of the Postal Service that was contributing to erosion of confidence in the ability of people to vote by mail. That wasn't a Democratic plot. And all of the gaslighting we're listening to here doesn't change the facts. Mr. Bloom, you've admitted that, in fact, you supported and do support the changes that Mr. DeJoy undertook that were widely criticized, not just by Democrats, but by actual American people who received the mail or didn't, by businesses, by stakeholders, by the media. That didn't just originate in this room. Somehow, people were bothered by it because one of the most sacred institutions in America that still works during the pandemic, warts and all, was actually being threatened in the public mind by these changes. And that the reason was political. We didn't make that up. A federal judge confirmed it. Mr. Bloom, you agreed with those changes? You agreed to hire Mr. DeJoy because you found him qualified? You were, according to one of your colleagues, you were all tickled pink with the performance of the Postmaster General in the height of the controversy during a pandemic. Are you still tickled pink with his performance?
The board supports the Postmaster General.
Your colleagues said 100% of the board were tickled pink and had complete support. So was he speaking for you that you were tickled pink? Just want to get it in the record that you're tickled pink.
I'm generally not tickled pink by things, but as I said, the Board of Governors believes the Postmaster General, in very difficult circumstances, is doing a good job, and we've been involved with the development of a plan that we think will make the Postal Service much stronger.
I appreciate your candor. I'm running out of time. Respectfully, I disagree, and I hope President Biden disagrees as well, and that we take action to replace the Board of Governors with people who care about the Postal Service and are going to be committed to their job of oversight and accountability. I yield back.
Madam Chair, point of order.
The gentleman's recognized for a point of order.
I just wanted to state for the record, Mr. Conley pointed over about voting to object in the election. I've never, ranking member, I've never voted to object to a presidential election. But I will tell you who has, Nancy Pelosi in 2004. So I just wanted to state that for the record. I yield back.
Madam Chairwoman, if I may, I appreciate the distinguished gentleman's comment. I did not name anybody who voted to overturn the election. Certainly did not mean to include Mr. Comer if he didn't do it.
Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grossman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to just in general thank you for getting out the contract with regard to the new delivery vehicles. I think you did a great job in selecting the vehicles, and I'm sure that they're going to be a great asset to the Postal Service.
Thank you, sir.
Next, I have kind of a technical question here, and I guess it could be either one of you. I know there's a lot of controversy about this pre-funding the pension plan. And I've talked to people back in my district who are very emotional about it, but they don't know how it works. So I figure between the two of you folks up here today, you should know how it works. If we have 3 different individuals, and they began this pre-funding in the first decade here, 2006 or 2007.
Can you speak? I can't hear you.
Okay. I believe they began the pre-funding in around 2006, 2005, around then?
Yes, sir.
Okay. if I have 3 different employees, one employee began working at the Postal Service in 1975 and ended in 2005. So he entirely worked before the new mandate came in. We got another employee who began work in 2000. He's going to retire in 2030. So he kind of straddles the period before the pre-funding and the period after. We got another employee who starts working in 2010 and winds up retiring in 2040. So his entire tenure is part of the pre-funding. When we calculate the pre-funding, how is it calculated? First of all, on the guy who retires before the pre-funding begins. Is that pay-as-you-go for his pension?
The fellow retires before pre-funding began. The cost of his retirement benefits would actuarially be calculated and be in our underlying cost. But he would not have the pre-fund. There's 2 elements. There's the liability, the projected liability, and then there's the pre-funding mandate of that projected liability.
Okay, but if the guy who retires before the pre-funding starts, do we operate, and the union president can jump in here too, is that pay-as-you-go then?
If they retire, the pre-funding aspect of it is, I believe the way the calculation works is we take all employees that are in Postal Service employ, whether they're there for 3 years or 4 years, and they got another 30 years ahead of them, and we start calculating what their future retirement benefit would be and amortizing that over some period of time.
Right, I understand. But so the person who already retired, the way we pay for his pension or medical is unrelated to what happened in 2005, 2006, right?
If he retired,
Before
I believe you're right on that. Yeah.
Right, so he goes, okay. And the person who starts after that, when we calculate that, that's an entirely amortized thing, and we calculate how much money we got to put in there so when he retires, we're ready to go, right? The guy in the middle, the guy who, say, starts working in 2000 and retires in 2020 or something, so that's a hybrid.
Yeah.
We pre-fund some, but not all.
Now, we would pre-fund, once the pre-funding mandate came in, you would calculate whoever was on the rolls, you would calculate what that liability was, and then that would be amortized in terms of part of the pre-funding.
So this is the question, so do we try to catch up or not? Because if we have a postal employee who began working before the mandate, but retires after the mandate, when he retires, we still have some of that liability unfunded, is that correct? So when he retires, part of it should be the money we've set aside, which we haven't, but part of the money set aside and part pay as you go? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, well, the overall liability is calculated based on everybody that's on the payroll, right, and retirees. And that's the overall liability that actuarially gets adjusted, every year. The pre-funding portion was to the pre-funding portion was to advance to put more money into the fund for the future retirement benefit of everybody that's on the workforce. So some may retire, may never get to, they're not vested, they may never get to a retirement status with the Postal Service, yet we're pre-funding their liability.
Okay. I guess I used up all my time, huh?
Yeah.
Too bad, no fun.
Well, it sounds like I confused
Yeah,
them all.
the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Krishnamurthy, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. DeJoy. I just want to clear up a couple things. As you said at your testimony at page 9, the USPS's performance in the election and delivering millions of mail-in ballots was, quote, unquote, a great success story, correct?
Yes, sir.
And as you detail in your testimony, you provided, quote, unquote, secure and timely delivery of the ballots that were entrusted to you, right?
Yes, sir.
You did everything possible to prevent fraud in mail-in balloting, correct?
I don't know that we're in charge of fraud. I don't know what you're referring to.
You did everything to prevent fraud with regard to the mail-in ballots in your custody, correct?
Within our custody, we protected the security of the mail. Yes.
And you're not aware of any fraud with regard to the mail-in ballots that you delivered?
No.
Joe Biden won the election, right?
Yes, sir.
Let me turn you to a chart that the Washington Post produced on February 6th. It talks about the delivery, the on-time performance of the delivery of 2-day and 3- to 5-day first-class mail. And basically, it charts what has occurred with regard to this on-time delivery from January 2020 through December 2020. And at the top, it basically says that in January 2020, on-time delivery was roughly around 90%, and on-time delivery for 3- to 5-day mail was roughly 80%. So 90% for 2-day delivery, 80% for 3- to 5-day delivery of first-class mail. You took office around the end of July, around June 20th, right?
Mm-hmm. June 15th.
June 15th, fair enough. And after you took direction or leadership at USPS, what happened with regard to 2-day delivery is it went from roughly the 90s all the way down to around 70% toward the end of the year. And with regard to 3- to 5-day, it went from roughly 80% when you took charge of USPS down to approximately 40%, and that's according to data from the USPS. So, sir, when you get to 40%, basically what you're telling your customers is you have a roughly 4 in 10 chance that their 3- to 5-day delivery standard is going to be met. And that's starting to sound like Vegas. And the problem is that sending a letter through the USPS should not be a game of chance. And that's why my constituents are so outraged. But let me talk to you about 2-day mail for 1 second. According to the February 12th Washington Post, there's an article in there that says that you have, quote unquote, discussed plans to eliminate 2-day delivery for first-class mail. You don't dispute that you are considering, as part of your 10-year plan, the elimination of the 2-day delivery first-class mail standard, are you?
We are evaluating all service standards.
Sir, will you commit to keeping 2-day delivery of first-class mail locally?
There will be 2-day mail class in our plan. Some percentage of that, where the reach is right now, may change.
So but what you're saying is that for local mail, first class.
You need to define local. And I don't agree with any of your premise about my involvement. Are you trying to suggest?
You can take that up with the Washington Post, sir. Let me direct you.
Well, it's unfortunate that that's where you get your information, because it's going to take more than that to fix the Postal Service.
Well, sir, the Washington Post sourced it from the USPS, so you can talk to your data sources
many
at the
members
USPS,
here
sir.
really don't
Let me
know
turn your
what's going on
attention
within
to
the
another
Postal
issue, sir, which is this. According to your own testimony, you said that the first step in your reorganization or your operational changes is we became more disciplined by running our trucks on time and on schedule, according to page 14 of your testimony. The LA Times ran a story and investigation showing that trucks that ran on time left half empty and left mail at their processing facility. So, Mr. Diamondstein, let me just ask you this. To the constituent who comes to me complaining that their medications haven't arrived on time, I shouldn't tell them that the trucks were on time, should I?
Our position has always been that it's called.
Sir, just a yes or no question.
Time has expired.
You should not have to.
Gentleman may answer the question.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The question,
To the constituent who complains that their medications haven't arrived on time, I should not go to them and just say, the trucks ran on time. Don't worry, the trucks ran on time.
you are correct, and we agree with you.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cloud, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. Can you hear me? Thank you for being here today. Really appreciate the opportunity to address what is this important topic. Certainly, the Postal Service has been on the high-risk list, I think, since 2009, the previous Obama-Biden administration. So it's time for us to address it for sure. I want to especially welcome back Postmaster DeJoy. It's great to have you back here in what hopefully is a more substantive conversation than the last time you were here. Last time it was unfortunately in such a hyper-politicized environment that it seemed impossible to really get anything done in the ways of conversation. Now, Chairman Bloom, could you remind us as to how Postmaster DeJoy became the postmaster? Was this a political appointee? Was this a partisan standard? Could you remind us of that, please?
Sure. At the end of last year, the then existing Postmaster General indicated that she intended to retire, and the board embarked on a search process, a rather traditional search process, hired an outside firm who specializes in search. We wound up identifying 200 people who were potentials. That list was then winnowed. There were then a number of people interviewed. And finally, the board came to a decision.
And this is a partisan board, a bipartisan board?
The board at the time and today has both Democrats and Republicans on it.
And that vote was a partisan vote, or how did that vote come down?
The vote was unanimous.
Okay, that's what I recalled. And that was part because of your great logistics experience in the private sector. And it seemed to me that you came into the position and began to make some systemic changes. I know one of the things that my colleague just mentioned was the fact that one of the things you looked at was that overtime costs were going up. Meanwhile, our bulk delivery was going down. How much mail we were delivering was going down. And so you began to look at that as, hey, here's a way we can maybe save some money for the American taxpayer. Maybe you didn't understand the political environment that we were in at the moment, but it seemed like that has been the case, that the attempts have been to address some of the systemic issues. The GOA, the GAO, I should say, put out a report in May 2020 that said the United States Postal Service's current business model is not financially sustainable due to the declining mail volumes, increased compensation and benefits costs, and increased unfunded liabilities and debt. We've known for a long time that the USPS is not in a sustainable business model, especially with the competitors we see and the changing dynamics of how we communicate and how we ship and do mail. Does this bill address any of these issues?
Sir, in our plan, there are 3 to 4 different elements, segments of it that bring us to sustainability and growth and serving the American people. And this is an important part of it. This is about a third of, gets us a third of the way where we need to be in the plan that we have put together. So it is very important to the future sustainability, which I believe with our design, we have a sustainable and viable postal service.
Okay, but that's in your report to be given to us in short order, right? That's not been presented yet. Those proposals aren't in this bill.
They're not, but
Is that
really, it's the only legislative ask where we're proceeding with in our plan.
Okay.
So if you want a viable postal service and can trust that we have a plan to move forward, this is a good way to help.
Okay. Could you talk about some of the logistics? Do you believe that the rise in third-party logistic companies offers opportunities for the Postal Service to increase work sharing?
I'm not a fan. I'm evaluating work share. I think it's, in many ways, it has enabled people to run around a network, and it's part of the reason we have a hollowed-out network, and the network is the biggest part of our problem. But I do see third-party logistics companies. They have customers, and customers need to get to the American people. And it's part of our long-term plan. We think we need to have a stronger marketing and product-oriented type of service that attracts all types of companies to put more. Mail is becoming, packages is mail. We saw that during the pandemic. Our competitors stopped delivering to many different areas. We continue to deliver to 160 million addresses a day. We only deliver 35% of the packages to the American community right now, and I think we have an opportunity to grow that and serve the people. And having partnerships with commercial businesses and being fully integrated with them as third-party organizations really know how to do is a big opportunity for us.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to first thank Mr. Conley for his devastating refutation of the propaganda that we were treated to today. But I want to talk about the future. Chairman Bloom, do you and the board agree with Mr. DeJoy's contemplated elimination of first-class mail currently delivered in 2 days? Is this something that you and the board have discussed? And do you think that this would improve the public's satisfaction with current delivery performance?
Congressman, as I said earlier, the plan has not been finalized. So I have to simply rely upon my broad statement, which is the plan, and you will obviously have a lot of opportunity to diligence it. But the plan is committed to revitalizing and strengthening and growing the Postal Service. There will be elements of it, I suspect, that some don't like, and there'll be elements that others do. But I guess I would ask, Congressman, that when you evaluate it, you look at it in its totality and ask whether in its totality it moves the Postal Service forward.
Well, then, Mr. DeJoy, let me come to you. In terms of the totality of this idea, which you seem to have some buy-in from Chairman Bloom about, what is the logic of eliminating first-class service, which generally delivers the mail in roughly 2 days, and moving instead to a 3 to 5 day window? How will that improve the appeal and the resiliency of the post office?
Well, we believe that the appeal of the the appeal of the Postal Service will survive these minor changes that we're making. Not coming up with an operating model that can get out of losing $10 billion a year will somebody mentioned a future death spiral. I would suggest that we are on a death spiral. We cannot, even with this legislation, we cannot continue to lose money. Now, local, what we're looking at with regard to, we're not first class is still a very, very big part of our service to the American people, and it's a very, very big part of our model. We have, in order to meet first-class standards, in order to meet first-class standards, we have operated many, many different networks that cost us significantly and have not made performance.
Okay, the time belongs to the gentleman.
Do you plan to prevent first-class mail from being shipped by airplane?
I'm sorry?
Do you plan to prevent first-class mail from being shipped by airplane?
In our strategy, if we in fact get the relief that we need in terms of time, we will put more mail on the ground. And I will tell you that a big reason for our service performance failures this peak season had to do that our air carriers performed at 50 to 60%.
Well, okay, so if you would just explain the philosophy behind this contemplated change, how does changing the standards to lengthen delivery times, to double or triple delivery times, successfully address service problems?
Well, you cannot. When you want me to answer that? I'll talk about mail, for instance.
I do. I think America wants to know.
We can talk about mail. We can talk about 3 days to get from New York to California. We can talk about that. We can't do that on a truck. And if you look at what happens, right, we take mail, we process it in an originating plant, we load it on a truck, we take it to an air terminal. A terminal handler loads it on a plane. Then we fly it to some other location somewhere around the country to be sorted by somebody else, then to maybe get on another plane to fly to the other location, right, to go to a terminal handling station, to go load it on a truck, to go to an area mail distribution center, to go to a destinating plant, to go to a DDU to get delivered by a carrier, and we got 3 days to do that. And that network, sir, over the last year has been performing at about a 55 to 6 to 70% rate, right? And that is a big reason for a lot of our failure, especially through the Christmas holiday. We've had packages, first-class packages, not even in that statistic, being held up at airmail facilities across the country. It is not reliable. It is growing inconsistently reliable.
It sounds like your solution to the problems you've identified is just surrender. You're basically saying, because the mail has been late under your leadership, we're just going to change the standards and build it into the system that it will be late.
Sir, the standards have not been met. The 3 to 5 day standards have been running at 80% for years. It's not reliable. You can sit here and think that I'm bringing all this damage to the Postal Service, but as I said earlier, the place was operationally faulty because of lack of investment and lack of ability to move forward, which is what we're trying to do.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gibbs, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I want to try to clear up a little discussion that happened to my friend from Ohio, Jim Jordan, being accused of gaslighting from my colleague from Virginia. And, you know, I don't think it's a post office issue. You deliver the mail. When election boards in certain states were mailing out universal mail-out of ballots with no verification, that wasn't your problem. That was the election board problem. And to take this, as my gentleman, my colleague from Virginia did, took it out of context. You know, you guys deliver the mail. You know, what the election boards put out, that's what they put out, and you mail it, you deliver it. And so I think that's just taken out of context, and it's just radical playing politics. Obviously, we're here, this hearing, for the financial condition of the Postal Service. And, you know, in my experience, there's generally 2 types of businesses. Businesses that make things and businesses that provide services. You know, if you make a crappy product, you go out of business. If you perform a crappy service, you go out of business. And unfortunately, what I've seen happen, and I hear from my constituents and my own experience, the service is really bad. I'm going to give it just a couple of examples because I think it's actually gotten worse since the holiday period. I just talked to my CPA yesterday. He mailed a 10 by 12 envelope with the proper postage from Cleveland to Columbus, mailed on January 5th, 166 miles approximately. It arrived yesterday. I have a local county Veteran Service Center that sent a 5-figure check, certified mail with return receipt, mailed on December 9th to Falls Church, Virginia. It was delivered on January 7th. On January 21st, they did another package, another envelope, and it took them a month again. I have a constituent that reported a 5-week delay to send an envelope 5 miles in my district from Navarre to Massillon. These examples go on and on. My personal examples, you know, it's pretty embarrassing when you have to call up a local retailer. In this case, it was JCPenney, because I received a JCPenney bill last week that was due on January 25th. And the next day, I got the JCPenney bill that's due on February 25th. And it's, so I have to, personally, I've lost all confidence in the postal system. I get mail that doesn't arrive. Last week, I signed up, earlier I signed up where they take the photographs. And last week, when I get the email, I had 2 first-class pieces of mail. The one showed up. The other one hasn't showed up yet. So I'm doing everything I can. I won't send payments through the mail anymore. That's how much confidence I've lost in the system. So, Mr. DeJoy, you have a huge challenge ahead of you because, you know, I'm a baby boomer. I had confidence in the mail. I'm not a Generation Z or a millennial. I had confidence. I've completely lost it. Right now, personally, my goal is to be able to get to the point where I put my mailbox in the garbage can. So that's how I feel about the service that's been, it's just been deplorable. Medicare integration, I think I fully support that. I see in some of my background notes here, a typical retirer from the Post Office Service does not enter into Medicare because their monthly premium would be normally $148 a month, and they're getting a better deal by not doing that. And I think that's, you know, unbelievable how that happened in the past. I think, as far as I can tell, I know Postal Service workers are different than federal employees. It's kind of like an arm of government, whatever you want to say. But I think they're the only ones that don't have to sign up into Medicare. Mr. DeJoy and Bloom, I'm curious, when you talk about the $160 billion loss over 10 years projected, obviously we fixed the Medicare integration and the prepayment and all that. Are you also what are you factoring in for volume? Are you factoring in losing more volume, or do you think you're going to be able to get this ship reckoned up to the point where you'll be able to compete with your 2 big competitors and, of course, the Amazons of the world? And you know, we're seeing what's happening there. So what do you think on the volume in that 10-year projection?
The plan that we are putting forward does have a growth plan in it. As I discussed, we tried to have a balanced plan of legislation, cost improvements, and revenue growth, and we are preparing the organization.
So you're basing that, I don't know how much time, are you basing that on increased volume or decreased volume?
Increased volume mostly in the package business and some mail-like product. Excuse me.
I hope you're right. I guess I would just challenge you a little bit, because what I'm seeing, you know, I bought some stuff through like Amazon. I get the stuff 2 days later. They tell me when it's coming. No shipping costs.
A lot of it comes through us.
What's that?
A lot of it comes
and that's
through
right.
us
I'm glad you made that point.
because it gets entered into
Gentleman's time has
delivery
expired.
units.
The gentleman may answer his question.
Yeah. You can answer.
First of all, on your first point about this being, you know, about the service, I have to remind this committee that the Postal Service is living in a nation where the pandemic exists also, okay? And that has a significant impact on us. But if mail and packages got to our delivery units, we delivered to 161 million addresses, 6 days a week, at over 96% of the time. That's through the pandemic, all those service things, even through peak. The problem was getting mail and packages through our network. Significant air capacity was lost. Significant transportation capacity was lost. 40% package volume over any peak plan that we had, right? Which a truckload of mail is 500,000 pieces. A truckload of packages is 5,000. Right? It's significantly different. And then we had a huge environment. And this is American. This is not Amazon in the network. This is American consumers. Nobody in our network volume took up more than 2 or 3, 4% of the volume. Right? Then we had non-machinables, which were 100% more. Big boxes that our workers have no machinery, nothing to deal with. Right? This was the environment. We had a 650,000 person organization that hired 200,000 people last year, right? And the numbers didn't go up. That was turnover. Turnover because of the environment and the stress and historical lack of good tactical procedures with regard to our workforce. So this is the culmination of what happened to your service. right? And this is a plan that we are going to address to try and fix going forward, and it does have growth in it. It has significant growth in it, and we need your support for this bill.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Mfume, is recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Mfume.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. Thanks for calling this hearing. Like you and so many other members of this committee, I'm grateful that we are having an opportunity to put in place a process whereby the Postal Service would be in a position that guarantees its sustainability well into the future. Last August, I sat with many of you on this committee and inquired about the changes implemented under the leadership of Mr. DeJoy and that of the Postal Service.
Mr. Mfume,
Board of
can you
Governors.
center your mic or your computer so we can see your face? By law, we have to show you during the questioning. And we can't see you right now.
I did not know, Madam Chair, that you could not.
Okay. Yeah, fine now. Thanks.
Sorry about that. I questioned the relationship during that meeting between the accelerated removal of sorting machines and collection boxes and the decreases in mail arrival times. I also asked Mr. DeJoy and the chairman if they were aware that the expedited street to afternoon sortation program implemented in July had effect all over zip codes, opposed by the National Association of Letter Carriers and opposed by postal workers across the board. Now, the people on this committee and citizens across the country are free to ascribe whatever definition they choose to the response that I got. But in my opinion, the response was empty words, and worse yet, empty words that continue to lead to empty mailboxes. I appreciate the ranking member's previous line of questioning to the witnesses when he asked each one of them if in fact they thought that Mr. DeJoy's intent was to slow down the delivery of mail prior to the election. And I would say to the gentleman and remind myself that unless one is a heart surgeon or a brain surgeon, that it is almost impossible for a third-party witness to accurately determine what a person's intent is in their heart or in their brain. But Madam Chair, when we take that question and turn it around and ask instead about what was the effect, perhaps the better questions to the witnesses would have been, did Mr. DeJoy's actions have the effect of slowing down the mail? The disassembling of sorting machines, the removal of mailboxes from communities, and the denial of many overtime requests, did they have the effect of slowing down the mail? And I would dare venture to say that most, if not all, would say yes, that is the effect, and that was the effect. My office, like many of yours, receives a daily significant number of complaints from constituents who've gone days, some weeks, without receiving their mail and receiving it on time. In Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Howard County, Maryland, that has been the case now for months. It is very difficult, and I don't want this lost. I know we're talking about trying to find a way to create and craft new legislation, but I don't want it lost on the fact that there are a lot of people who have suffered and had to pay extra money, late fees for bills that were not late, but rather delivered late. And there were the many of those who missed out on their medication schedules because their medications were not on time. These delays have had harmful impacts on the lives of our constituents, and yet they continue to worsen. And so, like my colleagues, I'm grateful that the chairwoman has decided to hold this hearing, because now we will have the opportunity to construct and review legislative proposals to place the Postal Service on a sustainable footing. But let's not rewrite history. The good was, what happened between then and now was that we had a free and fair election, in which we owe a debt of gratitude to postal workers all over this country who, against great odds, delivered the mail as essential workers on time. They delivered ballots on time. The bad news is that we are still left with the effects of the cuts, not the intent, the effects. So the Postal Service's financial condition, as we all know, has deteriorated over the years due to a number of factors. We don't need to get into finger pointing. I do believe that these proposed legislative opportunities can reinstate service standards and implement the kind of protections for postal workers if we can get away from casting aspersions in the very first hearing that has been set up to find a way out of this problem. So on that, Madam Chairman, I would yield back. Mr. DeJoy, thank you for coming back again. I would ask, though, before I yield back my time, can you tell us when your strategic plan will be revealed? And will you commit here today, if it's the pleasure of the chair, to come back before this committee to explain it in detail and to receive the critique and the questions and perhaps the support even of members of this committee?
Sir, I think probably within the next 2 weeks, we should be ready with our plan. And I'm always happy to come before this committee and explain it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Missouri, Mrs. Bush, is recognized for 5 minutes. Ms. Bush, would you please unmute?
I'm having some technical difficulties.
We're having some technical problems. We're going to go to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Donalds. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's been a lot of speeches in this hearing, so I'm going to just get to questions. Mr. Kozar, my number one question is, can you describe the legislative reforms that Congress can explore to assure that workforce costs do not unnecessarily increase going into the future?
Sure. Thank you, sir, for asking. One thing is there was a bill that I very much like, introduced by Representative Lynch, which would address the Retiree Health Benefits Fund to a method that's a little different than what was being discussed today. And what it would do is take the approximately $42 billion in the Retiree Health Benefits Fund and authorize a portion of it, 25 to 33%, to be invested in index funds the same way that federal workers have a TSP, which is able to be invested in index funds. And the result of that is, rather than getting low yields from treasuries in the RHBF, the money would grow faster. And the Postal Service Inspector General did a study on that, and it's the best strategy out there as far as I can tell. I think my feeling is that the Postal Service in general needs operational freedom to figure out ways to drive down costs. I know Congress likes to mandate every year that 6-day paper mail delivery continue. They dropped this in the Annual Appropriations Act. But I don't know why that needs to be mandated. If the Postal Service and the public truly demand it, then why not remove the mandate and let the Postal Service adjust accordingly? I think the Postal Service also needs to be empowered to or encouraged to solve the overtime issue. In 2019, the Postal Service used something like $5 billion, spent $5 billion in overtime. Whether that means they need to hire more employees or temporary employees so that they're not having to have people run extra overtime costs, or if there's some other solution, I think that's worth exploring. And I've also noted that an idea kicked around for a very long time is collective bargaining. Right now, when Postal Service bargains with its 4 unions, if it can't come to agreement, it goes to mediation. And in the course of that, the Postal Service's financial condition is not explicitly required to be considered. And so putting it in a statute that at least be a factor considered, not a determining factor for the results, but at least considered explicitly, could possibly bend cost curves over the long term.
Thank you, Mr. Kozar. Ms. Whitcomb, my question for you is, can you expand on your testimony and describe how big of an impact to the Postal Service current financial crisis the documented over-reliance on overtime work has been?
Yes, we did that work and released it last summer and found that there were significant increases from fiscal year 2014 to 2019 in overtime. I believe Mr. Kosar just mentioned that work as well. Obviously, we were in a different time period. COVID had not been a consideration at that point, so I think there's maybe some different considerations now, but overtime had grown considerably during that 6-year period.
Thank you so much. Postmaster General, Mr. DeJoy, I'm going to give you the rest of my time to answer this one. Would you actually support shifting the defined benefit pension to a defined contribution more in line with the private sector?
I didn't hear you, sir.
Would you support shifting the defined benefit pension to a defined contribution more in line with the private sector?
No, I think the compensation and benefit plans that are in the Postal Service right now have been negotiated over a number of years, and I'm not prepared. That's not anything that we're looking at. We respect we work with the union leadership, and that the plans as the way they are right now is not changing them is not part of our strategy. We think there are better ways. There are many ideas about what to do with the Postal Service. I will submit that we have spent 8 months with a couple hundred people in leadership at the Postal Service. In defining what the best solution, holistic solution was to serve the American people, and we've come up with a plan that I'll release soon. And messing around with employee benefit plans is not part of what I'm interested in right now.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.